They still whisper her name in Pine Valley, like a warning or a prayer. Her name was Clara Devine, a quiet black schoolteacher in 1923 Georgia, gentle with children, brave with books, and never one to raise her voice. But one night, the Klan came for her school, and her brother, and something inside her broke in a way no one saw coming. People say the world turned upside down after that. A teacher outsmarted men who'd ruled the county with fire and fear, and in just 24 hours she took down 57 of them, moving through the night like someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. Some call her a monster, some call her a hero, but everyone agrees on one thing: you don't get to destroy a woman's world and expect her to stay the victim. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The October morning arrived cold and clean. Clara Devine walked the dirt road toward the schoolhouse with her shoulders straight and her head high. She carried a canvas bag heavy with graded spelling quizzes. In her other hand, she held a tin of biscuits wrapped in cloth. The biscuits were still warm. She had risen before dawn to bake them for her students. The road curved through tall pines. Their needles carpeted the ground in rust-colored layers. Clara's shoes crunched softly against the earth. She breathed deeply. The air smelled of pine sap and coming winter. She thought about the lesson she would teach today. The children were learning long division. Most struggled with it, but Lily Mae Carter showed real promise with numbers. Clara planned to give her extra problems to solve. She thought about Isaiah. Her younger brother had stayed at the schoolhouse again last night. He did that sometimes when he heard rumors, when white men drank too much at the mill, when tensions ran high after a traveling preacher came through. Isaiah was 19 and believed he could protect the school with his presence. Clara had argued with him about it. She told him his life mattered more than a building, but Isaiah was stubborn. He said the school mattered because it gave children hope. The road turned. Clara stopped walking. Smoke rose above the tree line. Her heart lurched. She dropped the biscuit tin. It hit the ground with a dull clang. She ran. The canvas bag slapped against her hip. Her breath came hard and fast. The smoke grew thicker. It stained the clean morning sky with ugly gray streaks. She rounded the final bend and saw it. The schoolhouse was gone. Only the foundation remained. Blackened wood beams jutted from the rubble like broken bones. Smoke drifted from the ruins in lazy coils. The heat still shimmered in the air above it. Clara stood frozen. Her chest heaved. The spelling quizzes slipped from her fingers and scattered across the dirt. A small sound came from the brush to her left. Clara turned sharply. "Who's there?" A whisper. "Miss Devine?" Lily Mae Carter emerged first. The girl was 8 years old with her hair in 2 careful braids. Her dress was torn at the hem. Her eyes were red from crying. Behind her came Henry Cobb, Jr., 7 years old and thin as a rail. Both children looked terrified. Clara rushed to them. She knelt and pulled them close. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" "No, ma'am," Lily Mae whispered. "But they said they would. They said if our families kept sending us to school, they'd come back. They said worse things, too." Henry's voice shook. "They wore sheets, Miss Devine. White sheets over their heads, like ghosts. But they weren't ghosts. They were real men with real guns." Clara's hands trembled as she checked them for injuries. "When did this happen?" "Last night," Lily Mae said. "Late, after everyone went to bed. We heard the horses first. Then we heard shouting. My papa told me to hide in the cellar. I watched through the floor cracks. There were maybe 10 of them. Maybe more. They had torches. They laughed," Henry added quietly. "They laughed while it burned." Clara stood. Her legs felt unsteady. "Where are your parents now?" Home, scared. Papa said we shouldn't come here. But I wanted to warn you. I wanted to tell you about the fire before you saw it. Clara looked back at the smoking ruins. Isaiah, was my brother here? Did you see him? Both children shook their heads. We don't know, Miss Devine, Lily May said. We didn't see anybody inside, but it was dark, and the fire was so bright it hurt to look at. Clara's throat tightened. Go home, both of you. Stay with your families. Don't come back here until I tell you it's safe. But, Miss Devine? Go. Now. The children ran. Clara watched them disappear down the road before turning back to the ruins. She circled the foundation slowly. The heat still radiated from the collapsed beams. She saw no body, no sign of Isaiah. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by fresh fear. If he wasn't here, where was he? She ran toward home. The small house she shared with Isaiah sat a mile from the school. She covered the distance in minutes. Her lungs burned. She burst through the front door. Isaiah. Silence. His bed was neatly made. His coat hung on its hook. His boots sat by the door, still muddy from yesterday. But Isaiah was gone. Clara's hands formed fists. She forced herself to think clearly. The schoolhouse had burned. Isaiah had been there to guard it. He was missing. The children said masked riders came. White sheets, torches, threats, laughter. The Klan. Clara grabbed her coat and left the house. She went straight to the sheriff's office in town. Sheriff Dalton Briggs sat behind his desk with his boots propped on a stack of papers. He was a thick man with a red face and small eyes. He looked up when Clara entered. His expression soured immediately. What do you want? Clara kept her voice steady. The schoolhouse burned last night. Masked riders set it. They threatened families. My brother is missing. I need you to investigate. Briggs snorted. Investigate what? Sounds like an accident to me. Old wood buildings catch fire all the time. It wasn't an accident. The children saw them. 10 men with torches and guns. Children see all kinds of things in the dark. Doesn't make it real. Clara's jaw tightened. Sheriff, I'm reporting a crime. A building was destroyed. A man is missing. You're obligated to... I'm not obligated to do a damn thing based on your word. Briggs swung his boots off the desk and stood. You've been stirring up trouble with that school of yours, teaching ideas above people's station, making folks restless. Maybe somebody got tired of it. Maybe they decided to handle it themselves. Are you admitting you know who did this? I'm not admitting anything except that you're disturbing county peace right now. Get out of my office before I arrest you for it. Clara held his gaze. She saw the truth in his small eyes. He knew. He approved. He might have even helped. She turned and walked out without another word. The woods behind the schoolhouse stretched for miles. Clara searched them as the day wore on. She found boot prints in the soft earth near the burned foundation, heavy prints from multiple men. She found drag marks leading toward the river. Her stomach turned. The sun dropped lower. Orange light filtered through the pines. Clara followed the drag marks deeper into the woods. Her breath came shallow now. Her hands shook. She knew what she would find. She had known since she saw the smoke. The riverbank appeared through the trees. Clara stopped walking. Isaiah hung from an old oak tree at the water's edge. His body swayed slightly in the evening breeze. They had posed him deliberately. His hands were bound behind his back. His face was swollen and bruised. On his chest, carved into his shirt with what looked like a knife, was a crude symbol, a cross, burning. Clara's legs gave out. She fell to her knees in the dirt. A sound escaped her throat, something between a sob and a scream. She crawled forward. She reached Isaiah's feet and touched them gently. They were cold. He had been dead for hours. The sun disappeared behind the trees. Darkness crept across the riverbank. Clara knelt beside her brother's body. As the last light faded, her tears stopped. Her breathing steadied. Something inside her crystallized, hardened, turned cold and sharp. She spoke into the gathering dark. "I will find them, every single one, and I will make them pay." Clara found a torn canvas tarp behind the burned schoolhouse. She spread it on the ground beneath the oak tree. Her hands moved with mechanical precision. She untied the rope from Isaiah's neck. His body was heavy and stiff. She lowered him onto the canvas with trembling arms. The night air was cold. Clara's breath came in visible puffs. She folded the tarp around Isaiah's body carefully, tucking the edges tight. She couldn't look at his face. Not yet. Not while she needed to move. She grabbed the corners of the tarp and pulled. The weight made her stumble. She adjusted her grip and tried again. Inch by inch, she dragged her brother's body away from the riverbank. The canvas scraped against roots and stones. Every few yards, she had to stop and rest. Her shoulders screamed. Her back ached. Sweat soaked through her dress despite the cold. The road seemed impossibly far. Clara made it halfway before she heard the horse. Hoof beats echoed through the trees. She froze, her hands still gripping the tarp. A lantern swung into view. Sheriff Briggs rode toward her on a gray mare. His badge caught the lamplight. He reined in and looked down at her with cold satisfaction. "Well now, what do we have here?" Clara straightened. "I'm taking my brother home." "That's so?" Briggs dismounted slowly. He walked over and kicked at the tarp. "Looks to me like you're disturbing a crime scene. Moving evidence. You said there was no crime. You said the fire was an accident." "Changed my mind. Been hearing reports all evening about agitation in the colored community. Threats of violence, revenge talk. That sounds like criminal conspiracy to me." Clara's voice stayed level. "I'm burying my brother, that's all. You're fomenting agitation is what you're doing. Teaching people to read legal codes, filling their heads with ideas about rights they don't have, making demands, causing unrest. Now, a white-owned schoolhouse burns down. It wasn't white-owned. The community built it themselves. On land leased from white owners. Same thing. And now you're out here in the dark with a body, probably planning some kind of spectacle, some kind of rally to stir people up even more." Briggs grabbed her arm. "You're under arrest." Clara jerked away. "You can't arrest me for nothing. I can arrest you for whatever I want." He pulled iron cuffs from his belt. "Put your hands out." "No." Briggs backhanded her across the face. Clara's head snapped sideways. Pain exploded through her cheek. She tasted blood. Before she could recover, he grabbed her wrists and locked the cuffs tight. The metal bit into her skin. "Your brother's staying right here until I say otherwise. Evidence in an ongoing investigation." Briggs yanked her toward his horse. "You're coming to the county jail." He mounted and hauled Clara up behind him. She looked back at Isaiah's wrapped body lying alone on the dark road. Her throat closed. Briggs spurred the horse forward. The last thing Clara saw before the trees swallowed them was the pale canvas disappearing into shadow. The county jail was a small brick building attached to the courthouse. Briggs dragged Clara inside and shoved her into a holding cell. The iron door clanged shut. He walked away without another word. His boots echoed down the corridor until silence fell. Clara sat on the narrow cot and pressed her sleeve against her bleeding mouth. The cell was barely 6 feet wide. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet. The only light came from a single bulb in the hallway. She closed her eyes and tried to think, tried to plan. But exhaustion pulled at her like deep water. Voices woke her. Clara opened her eyes. Dawn light filtered through a high window. 2 men stood outside her cell. Sheriff Briggs and someone she didn't recognize. The stranger was younger, maybe 35, with sandy hair and a pressed suit. He carried a leather folder under one arm. A silver badge was pinned to his vest. "This her?" the stranger asked. "That's her. Clara Devine. Troublemaker." The stranger studied Clara through the bars. His expression was unreadable. "Sheriff, give us a moment." Briggs bristled. "Now hold on." That wasn't a request. Something in the stranger's voice made Briggs back down. He muttered under his breath and walked away. The stranger waited until his footsteps faded before speaking. "Miss Devine, my name is Elijah Reeves. I'm a deputy marshal with the federal government." Clara stood slowly. "Federal?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been investigating corruption in this county for 3 months. Land fraud, election tampering, intimidation of Negro voters, the usual crimes." He pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked her cell. "I'm very sorry about your brother." Clara stepped out cautiously. "You know about Isaiah?" "I know what happened. I know the sheriff arrested you unlawfully. I know those men who burned your school and murdered your brother think they're untouchable." Elijah's jaw tightened. "They're wrong. Why are you here?" "Because I can help you. I have federal authority. I can bring these killers to justice if you work with me." Clara studied him carefully. His eyes seemed sincere, but she had learned not to trust easily. "The sheriff works with them. Half the town probably works with them. What makes you different?" "The law makes me different. Real law. Constitutional law. Not the version they practice in Pine Valley." Elijah opened his folder and showed her papers covered in official stamps. "I have jurisdiction here. I can override local authority. I can make arrests. I can bring federal charges that stick even when local juries refuse to convict." Something dangerous flickered in Clara's chest. "Hope." She tried to suppress it. "And what do you need from me?" "Everything you know. Names, places, dates. Any detail about Klan activity in this county? Who leads them? Where they meet? How they operate? The more evidence I gather, the stronger my case becomes." Clara hesitated. "What happens to Isaiah?" "I'll have his body brought to your home. You deserve to bury your brother properly." Elijah closed his folder. "The sheriff had no legal grounds to hold you. You're free to go, but I hope you'll consider helping me. Together we can make sure the men who did this face real consequences." Clara looked at this white federal marshal with his pressed suit and his promises. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe justice was possible. But belief felt dangerous. Still, what choice did she have? "All right," she said quietly. "I'll tell you what I know." Elijah arranged for a wagon outside. Isaiah's body had already been loaded onto the bed, still wrapped in the canvas tarp. Clara climbed onto the driver's bench. Elijah handed her the reins. "I'll come by your home this afternoon," he said. "We'll talk more then." Clara nodded. She snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward. The sun had fully risen now, painting the sky pale gold. She drove slowly through the quiet morning streets. People stared as she passed. Some looked away. Others watched with careful, measuring eyes. Clara's small house filled with neighbors by mid-morning. Women from the church arrived carrying dishes covered in cloth. Men stood on the porch, speaking in low voices. Children played quietly in the yard, understanding something terrible had happened, but not quite grasping what. Inside, Clara sat at her kitchen table. She stared at the wood grain and said nothing. Mrs. Ezekiel washed Isaiah's body in the back room. Clara could hear the gentle splash of water, the soft murmur of prayers. Other women prepared food. They moved around Clara like she was a stone in a stream. They touched her shoulder as they passed. They set plates in front of her that she didn't eat. Elijah's words kept repeating in her mind. Real law, constitutional law, federal authority. She wanted to believe those words meant something. She wanted to believe justice could come from outside this poisoned county. But belief felt like standing on rotten boards. Thomas Riddick arrived just before noon. He was a lean man in his late 20s, with a scar running from his left ear to his collarbone. He'd served in France with the 369th Infantry, came home expecting gratitude, and found only the same old hatred wearing different masks. Isaiah had looked up to Thomas, called him a hero. Thomas had taught Isaiah how to stand tall even when others tried to make him small. Thomas walked straight to Clara's table. His face was tight with anger. "We need to talk. Alone." Clara looked up at him. Something in his expression made her stand. She followed him outside to the back of the house where no one could overhear. Thomas glanced around to make sure they were truly alone before speaking. "That federal marshal, Elijah Reeves, you talked to him this morning? He released me from jail, said he could bring justice for Isaiah. Clara, he met with them last night." Her stomach dropped. "Met with who?" "The Klan leadership. I saw him myself. He rode out to the old Barker place around midnight. 3 hooded men were waiting. They talked for near an hour. Then he left." Clara's hands began to shake. "You're sure it was him?" "Positive. That fancy suit of his stood out in the lamplight. I was watching the place because we heard rumors of a gathering. Didn't expect to see a federal marshal there having a friendly chat." Thomas's jaw clenched. "Whatever you told him this morning, Clara, he's already passed it along." The hope that had flickered in her chest died completely. Clara felt something cold and hard replace it. He wanted names, details about Klan activity. "I gave him everything I knew." "Which means they know you talked. They know what you told him." Thomas grabbed her arm gently. "Clara, you're not just a witness anymore. He made you an informant. He's using you as bait to flush them out, to force them into making mistakes he can prosecute. He doesn't care what happens to you in the process." Clara pulled away and walked to the edge of the yard. The sun was high and bright. Birds sang in the trees. Everything looked normal. But nothing was normal. Nothing would ever be normal again. "He said he could make it right," she whispered. "He said the law would protect us. The law doesn't protect people like us. You know that. You've always known that." Thomas came to stand beside her. "Isaiah knew it too. That's why he slept at the schoolhouse. That's why he kept watch. Because we're the only ones who protect ourselves." Clara closed her eyes. She saw Isaiah's face, saw him laughing at dinner last week, saw him helping her students practice their letters, saw him hanging from that tree. When she opened her eyes again, everything had changed. "I need to see something," she said. Clara went inside and walked past the gathered neighbors without speaking. She entered her bedroom and closed the door. She knelt beside her bed and pulled out a heavy trunk that had belonged to her father. The lock was stiff. She opened it carefully. Inside lay everything she'd collected over the past 5 years. Military manuals from WWI that returning soldiers had given her, detailed maps of the county showing every road, every creek crossing, every abandoned building, notebooks filled with observations about patrol patterns, meeting locations, supply routes, sketches of simple traps and defensive positions she'd studied while teaching veterans to read. She'd told herself this knowledge was for protection, for preparation, for some distant future emergency. That future was now. Clara spread the maps across her bed. She opened the most recent notebook. Thomas appeared in the doorway. He looked at the materials without surprise. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked quietly. "I wasn't planning anything. I was just learning, just preparing." Clara traced a route on the map with her finger. "But I knew. Deep down, I knew it would come to this, eventually." Thomas stepped into the room and studied the maps. "There's a gathering tonight. Big one. They're celebrating the schoolhouse burning. Meeting at 3 different locations across the county before joining up at dawn for some kind of ceremony." "Where?" He pointed to 3 spots on her map. "Barnes Mill, the old tobacco barn near Cutter's Creek, and the Masonic Hall outside Ridgeway." He paused. 50, maybe 60 men total, all armed, all thinking they're untouchable. Clara opened a manual on field tactics and laid it beside the map. "The mill has only one entrance. The tobacco barn is mostly rotten timber. The Masonic Hall backs up to a steep ravine. You're thinking like a soldier. I learned from soldiers, from men who survived because they understood terrain and timing. Clara looked up at Thomas. Can you get help? People we trust? How many do you need? Not many. 6 good men who know how to move quiet and follow orders. Veterans, if possible. Men who understand what we're actually doing here. Thomas nodded slowly. This isn't just about Isaiah anymore, is it? No. This is about every single person they've terrorized, every family they've driven out, every child they've frightened, every dream they've destroyed. Clara's voice was perfectly calm. They think they can burn our schools and lynch our brothers and face no consequences. I'm going to teach them otherwise. They'll call you a monster. They already call us worse. Thomas extended his hand. Clara shook it. The pact was sealed. They spent the afternoon planning. Clara laid out the strategy with mathematical precision. First target would be the tobacco barn. Oldest structure, easiest to compromise. Smoke bombs made from materials any household kept. Force them outside where superior knowledge of terrain gave advantage. Second target was the mill. Single entrance meant controlled bottleneck, limited escape routes. Third was the Masonic Hall. The ravine provided natural barrier. Panic would do most of the work. No one needed to die, but everyone needed to understand that the rules had changed. By evening, Thomas had gathered 8 men, all veterans, all people who had lost family or property to clan violence. They assembled in Clara's barn after dark. She spread the maps on a workbench and explained the plan, spoke clearly and directly like she was teaching a classroom lesson. These men listened with the same intensity her students showed when learning to read. They divided into 3 groups. Clara would lead one personally. Thomas would lead another. A veteran named Marcus would lead the third. They synchronized pocket watches, established fallback positions, agreed on signals, everything precise, everything controlled. At midnight, they moved out. The tobacco barn stood isolated in a field 3 miles south. Clara and her team approached from the windward side. Inside, lamplight glowed. She heard voices, laughter, the clink of bottles. Clara placed the smoke canisters at strategic points around the structure's foundation. The building was old, dry, perfect kindling. She didn't need fire, just smoke, just confusion, just fear. She lit the fuses and fell back to her position in the tree line. Thick white smoke began pouring through gaps in the walls. Shouting erupted inside. Men stumbled out coughing, disoriented, trying to see through streaming eyes. They scattered in predictable directions, straight into carefully positioned obstacles. Ropes strung at ankle height, loose boards covering shallow pits. Tree branches waited to swing down at chest level. None of it was lethal. All of it was effective. By the time the smoke cleared, 19 men lay groaning in the dark field. Clara's team had already disappeared into the woods. The pattern repeated at Barnes Mill. Then again, at the Masonic Hall. Each time, Clara's superior planning turned advantage into dominance. Each time, men who thought themselves hunters discovered they were prey. The sun rose on a county transformed. 57 men had been systematically neutralized across 3 locations. None dead, but all thoroughly beaten, humiliated, and terrified. Word spread fast. By mid-morning, whispers moved through both black and white communities. The devourer, the most ruthless black woman, the one who struck back. Clara stood alone in her barn as dawn light filtered through the slats. Her clothes were torn. Her hands were scraped and bruised. Exhaustion made her sway on her feet. But she was not finished, because somewhere during the night, while searching a pocket for identification, she had found something unexpected. A document. A letter bearing an official seal. The clan wasn't just terrorizing families. They were part of something larger, something coordinated, something that went far beyond Pine Valley. Clara unfolded the letter and read it again in the growing light. Her expression didn't change, but something new kindled behind her eyes. This was bigger than revenge now. This was war. Clara pumped cold water over her hands and watched it turn pink as it hit the ground. The morning air was cool against her skin. Her knuckles were split and swollen. Her shoulders ached from carrying weight and swinging tools. She splashed water on her face and neck, washing away the night's residue. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the dirt path. Quiet voices murmuring. More footsteps joined them. She turned slowly, water dripping from her chin. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of her property. Maybe 20 people. All black. All watching her with expressions she couldn't quite read. Fear mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like hope. Old Mrs. Patterson stood at the front, leaning on her walking stick. Beside her stood the Cobb family, Henry Jr.'s parents, and his 3 siblings. Behind them clustered more neighbors, more families whose children had attended Clara's school. No one spoke at first. Clara dried her face on her sleeve and waited. Finally, Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat. "Child, what have you done?" "What needed doing?" Clara said quietly. "They're saying you took down 50 men last night. Maybe more." This came from Henry Cobb Sr., a sharecropper with hands like tree roots. "Saying you hit 3 different locations, saying not a single one of them saw you coming." Clara didn't confirm or deny it. "They're also saying," Mrs. Patterson continued, "that there's confusion all over the county this morning, that meetings got canceled, that certain men are too scared to leave their homes." She paused. "That maybe, for the first time in a long time, we can breathe a little easier." A young woman pushed forward from the back of the crowd. Clara recognized her, Evelyn Price, who worked as a domestic servant for wealthy white families in the neighboring county. Evelyn's face was tense with urgency. "Miss Clara, I need to tell you something," Evelyn said. "Something I heard 2 days ago, but didn't understand until this morning." Clara gestured for her to continue. "I work in the Latorne governor's cousin's household, cleaning mostly, serving at dinner parties." Evelyn glanced around nervously, then stepped closer and lowered her voice. "They talk like I'm not there, like I'm furniture. 2 nights ago, they had a meeting in the study. 6 men, politicians from across the state." Clara's attention sharpened. They were talking about land acquisitions, about expanding cotton operations westward, about removing obstacles. Evelyn's hands twisted together. They kept mentioning Pine Valley and 3 other counties, kept saying the process was ahead of schedule, that the local enforcement was handling the removals efficiently. "Removals," Clara repeated. "That's what they called it. Removals. Not violence, not terrorism, just removals." Evelyn's voice shook slightly. They had maps spread out, properties marked in red, all of them owned by black families. They were planning to seize the land once families fled from the attacks. The crowd murmured. Clara felt something click into place in her mind. "The schoolhouse burning," she said slowly. "Isaiah's murder. They weren't random acts." "No, ma'am. They were part of a plan. A big one." Evelyn pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. "I copied some of what I saw on their maps. Property lines, names, dates they expected each parcel to become available." Clara took the paper and unfolded it. The names were familiar. The Johnson family's farm, the Williams homestead, the collective property where 4 families sharecropped together. All marked for acquisition within the next 6 months. "They've been doing this across the state," Evelyn continued, "using clan violence to drive people off land, then using legal mechanisms to claim abandoned property. The Latorne governor's office coordinates it all. Local sheriffs and land agents carry it out." Thomas Riddick had approached during Evelyn's explanation. He looked over Clara's shoulder at the paper. "Your rampage last night," he said quietly. "You didn't just hit back at the Klan. You disrupted a major political operation." Clara stared at the list of names. Her personal vengeance had accidentally struck at something much larger. The men she'd confronted last night weren't just local terrorists. They were instruments of a statewide conspiracy. "We need to organize," she said, looking up at the gathered crowd. "This is bigger than Pine Valley. Bigger than one county. If they're doing this here, they're doing it everywhere." "What are you proposing?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Intelligence gathering. Documentation. Sabotage of illegal seizures." Clara's mind was already working through possibilities. "We need eyes and ears in White households, in government offices, in courthouses. We need to know their plans before they execute them." "You're talking about building a network," Thomas said. "Yes. Veterans who understand tactics and reconnaissance. Domestic workers who can listen and observe. Teachers who can forge documents and interpret legal language. Laborers who can disrupt supply lines and transportation." Clara looked at each face in the crowd. Anyone willing to fight back. Not with random violence, but with organized resistance. The crowd was silent. Then slowly, hands began to rise. Henry Cobb Sr. raised his first, then his wife, then Evelyn, then Mrs. Patterson, despite her age. Within minutes, nearly everyone present had volunteered. Clara felt something shift inside her chest. She had started this alone, driven by grief and rage. But she wasn't alone anymore. They spent the next hour discussing logistics. Who had access to what information? Who could move freely through white spaces? Who had skills in reading legal documents or understanding property law? They established simple communication protocols using Sunday church gatherings and market days as cover. As the crowd began to disperse, a horse and rider appeared on the road. Clara recognized him immediately. Deputy Marshal Elijah Reeves. The remaining neighbors went silent. Thomas moved to stand beside Clara, his hand resting on his belt. Elijah dismounted slowly, hands visible. He looked tired. His clothes were rumpled like he hadn't slept. He approached the yard cautiously, stopping several feet away. "Miss Devine," he said, "I need to speak with you." "You've done enough speaking," Clara said coldly. "Your words got my brother killed." "I know. And you used me as bait. You gave my testimony to the people who murdered him." Clara's voice was perfectly controlled, but sharp as broken glass. "You told me the law would protect us. You lied." Elijah flinched. "I didn't know the sheriff would leak your name. I thought I could trust him. I was wrong." "You were more than wrong. You were complicit." "Yes." Elijah met her eyes directly. "I was, and I've spent the past 2 days trying to understand how to make it right. Because I discovered something that connects to why your brother was killed." Clara said nothing, waited. The Latour governor's office is orchestrating these attacks, using local clan cells as enforcement for a land theft operation spanning 6 counties. He paused. "I have partial documentation, but I need help completing the picture. I need someone who understands what's happening on the ground. Why should I trust anything you say? You shouldn't, but I'm asking you to let me prove myself." Elijah's voice was earnest, almost pleading. "Whatever you did last night disrupted their entire operation. They're scrambling, panicking. This is the best chance we'll ever have to expose them completely." Thomas stepped forward. "You're asking her to risk her life again on your word. I'm asking her to let me risk mine alongside hers." Clara studied Elijah's face for a long moment, saw genuine remorse there, genuine determination. She had learned to read people carefully over years of navigating danger. Her instincts told her he was telling the truth, but her instincts had been wrong before. "Come inside," she said finally. "We'll talk. But if I sense even a hint of deception, you won't leave this property alive. Understood?" "Understood." Clara walked toward her house. After a moment's hesitation, Elijah followed. Thomas came too, positioned between them like a guard. Inside, Clara gestured to the kitchen table. Elijah sat. Clara remained standing, arms crossed. "You have one chance," she said. "Show me what you know." Nightfall came cold and quiet. Clara's home glowed with lamplight. The kitchen table had disappeared beneath layers of paper. County maps, property records Evelyn had copied from memory, sketches of government buildings, lists of names and dates. Thomas stood near the window, watching the road. Evelyn sat across from Clara, drawing the layout of the courthouse from memory. Henry Cobb Sr. studied a map of Pine Valley and the neighboring counties, tracing roads with his finger. Elijah had returned an hour ago with federal documentation. He'd spread it carefully across one corner of the table. Letters between the lieutenant, governor's office, and local land agents, transfer orders for properties not yet legally available, payment schedules for enforcement services. Clara examined each document methodically. Her teacher's training made her good at finding inconsistencies. She saw them everywhere. Dates that didn't match. Signatures forged badly. Properties listed as abandoned when she knew the families still lived there. "There's an auction tomorrow morning," Elijah said quietly. 10 properties from this county alone, all supposedly abandoned or seized for unpaid taxes. "The Carter farm is on that list," Henry said, pointing to a name. "I know for a fact Henry Jr.'s family paid their taxes in full last month. I was there when his father walked to the county office." Clara leaned forward. "Where is this auction happening?" "County courthouse, 9 in the morning." Elijah pulled out another document. "But the real decisions happen beforehand. There's a private meeting at 7 where buyers inspect the properties on paper and agree on prices. By the time the public auction starts, everything's already decided." "Who attends the private meeting?" Clara asked. "Land agents, the county tax collector, select buyers who've been approved in advance." Elijah hesitated. "The sheriff provides security." Thomas made a disgusted sound. "Of course he does." Clara stood and walked to the window. Outside, the night was perfectly dark. No moon. Good conditions for what she was beginning to plan. "We disrupt the auction," she said, "completely. Make it impossible for them to proceed." "How?" Evelyn asked. "By exposing the fraud publicly, by making the buyers too scared to participate, by proving the deeds are tampered with." Clara turned back to the table. "Evelyn, you said you've cleaned the tax collector's office?" "Yes, ma'am. Twice a week for the past year." "Do you know where he keeps the original property records?" "In a locked cabinet in his private office. But I've seen where he hides the key." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You want me to get the real documents?" "Tonight, before he can hide them." Clara looked at Thomas. "How many veterans can you gather within an hour?" 8, maybe 10. "Good. I need them positioned around the courthouse before dawn. Not to fight. To observe and report. I want to know everyone who enters that building. Every name. Every face." Thomas nodded and left immediately. Clara turned to Henry. "Your son knows the Carter family personally?" "Best friends with their boy. Goes to school there when there's school to go to." "I need him to warn the Carters. Tell them not to leave their property tomorrow, no matter who shows up." "Tell them," Clara Devine said, "to stay put and wait." Henry left quickly. Evelyn stood. "I'll go now. Get those documents before it's too late." "Be careful," Clara said. "If you're caught—" "I won't be." Evelyn's face was determined. "That man passes out drunk every night by 10 o'clock. I've seen it enough times." After Evelyn left, only Clara and Elijah remained. "You're really doing this?" Elijah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. If this works, you'll make powerful enemies, more than you already have. I made powerful enemies the moment I was born black in Georgia." Clara gathered the documents into organized stacks. "The only difference now is I'm fighting back." Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can get federal documentation of state involvement, proof that goes higher than the lieutenant governor. But I'll need 3 days." Clara looked at him sharply. "Can you do it without tipping anyone off?" "I think so. I have contacts in Atlanta, people who owe me favors." 3 days, Clara repeated. That's a long time. It's the best I can offer. Clara considered. Federal documentation would be valuable. But 3 days meant 3 days of risk. 3 days where the conspiracy could adapt. Still, if Elijah could prove state-level involvement, it would transform everything. Go, she said. But Elijah, if you betray us again, there won't be anywhere in this state you can hide. I know. He met her eyes. I won't. After he left, Clara stood alone in the quiet house. She felt the weight of what she'd set in motion. This wasn't a single night of vengeance anymore. This was organized resistance. This was war conducted through intelligence and precision, rather than simple violence. She thought of Isaiah, wondered what he would think of all this. He'd always been the gentle one, the optimist. He'd believed in gradual change, in education and patience. But patience hadn't saved him. Clara blew out the lamps one by one until only a single candle remained. Then she sat and began writing detailed instructions for tomorrow's operation. She named it in her head, Emberlight, a small flame in the darkness, the beginning of something larger. Dawn came gray and cold. Evelyn returned just before sunrise, exhausted but triumphant. She carried a leather satchel filled with original property documents. Clara spread them across the table and compared them to the forged versions Elijah had obtained. The differences were obvious once you knew where to look. Tax payments recorded that didn't appear on the forged copies. Ownership transfers backdated illegally. Entire pages replaced with fraudulent versions. This is enough, Clara said. More than enough. Thomas arrived with 9 veterans. Clara assigned each one a position around the courthouse square. Not to confront anyone, just to watch, to remember faces, to create the impression of being surrounded. At 8:30, Clara walked into the county courthouse wearing her teaching clothes. She carried the satchel of documents. She looked exactly like what she was, a respectable schoolteacher conducting official business. The tax collector was in his office, preparing for the auction. He looked up when Clara entered, annoyance crossing his face. "This is a private meeting," he said. "I'm aware." Clara set the satchel on his desk and opened it. "I'm here to discuss fraudulent property seizures." His face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Clara pulled out documents one by one. "The Carter farm. Taxes paid in full, but your records showed delinquency. The Williams homestead. Ownership documented back 3 generations, but your files claim it's abandoned." She kept pulling out papers. "Should I continue?" The tax collector stood. "You need to leave. Now." "No." Clara's voice was calm but absolute. "You need to cancel today's auction, immediately. Or I walk into that courtroom and present this evidence to every buyer waiting outside. You're threatening a county official. I'm preventing a crime." They stared at each other. Clara didn't blink, didn't move. She'd learned that stillness could be more intimidating than aggression. Finally, the tax collector looked away. "The buyers are already here." "Then send them home." "I can't. The paperwork is filed. The auction is scheduled. Then I'll stop it myself." Clara walked past him into the courtroom. 12 white men sat in the gallery, waiting. They looked up when she entered. Confusion first. Then hostility. Clara walked to the front and set the satchel on the judge's bench. "Gentlemen," she said clearly, "before you purchase anything today, you should know these properties are being sold under fraudulent documentation." Muttering broke out. One man stood. "Who are you?" "Clara Devine, schoolteacher, the sister of Isaiah Devine, who was murdered for trying to protect black property rights." She pulled documents from the satchel. "These are original county records showing the properties you're about to bid on are not legally available for sale. The families who own them have paid all taxes and maintained clear ownership." "This is outrageous," another man said. "Sheriff!" But the sheriff wasn't there. Thomas's veterans had quietly blocked the courthouse entrances, not with force, but with presence. White men in work clothes, standing silently, watching. If you proceed with this auction, Clara continued, you'll be purchasing property through documented fraud, which means any title you obtain will be legally invalid, which means you'll have paid for nothing. She let that sink in. I have copies of all these documents. If you buy today, I will ensure you spend years in court trying to defend your purchase. The buyers began looking at each other nervously. One by one, they stood and left. Within 10 minutes, the courtroom was empty, except for Clara and the tax collector who'd followed her inside. You just destroyed 6 months of planning, he said quietly. His face was red with anger and fear. Good, Clara said. Now call off the eviction of the Carter family. I can't. Yes, you can. Right now. Or I take these documents to the federal marshal's office in Atlanta myself. The tax collector's hands shook slightly as he pulled out official stationery. He wrote quickly, then stamped the paper with his seal. The eviction is cancelled, temporarily. Permanently, Clara corrected. Fine, permanently. He shoved the paper at her. But this isn't over. No, Clara agreed. It's not. Midday sun warmed the Carter farm when Clara arrived. She'd walked the 3 miles from town, carrying the official cancellation notice. Henry Jr.'s father stood in his field, staring at his home like he couldn't believe it was still his. His wife stood beside him, one hand pressed to her chest. Their children played near the porch, unaware how close they'd come to losing everything. Clara handed the father the document. Your eviction is cancelled, permanently. The tax collector confirmed your payments were recorded correctly. The man read the paper 3 times. Then he looked at Clara. You did this? Yes. Why? Clara thought of Isaiah, thought of the schoolhouse, thought of every family driven from their land over the years. Because someone had to. The man's wife stepped forward and hugged Clara suddenly, fiercely. Clara stood stiff at first, then slowly returned the embrace. Thank you, the woman whispered. Thank you. Clara nodded. She didn't trust herself to speak. She walked back to the fence line and stood there, looking out across the field. The cotton was almost ready for harvest. The work would continue. The family would remain. For the first time since Isaiah's death, Clara allowed herself the smallest smile. She'd won something today. Not vengeance, not violence, something quieter, something that might last. Early afternoon sunlight cut through the pines as Clara walked Pine Valley's main street. Her shoulders were straight, her stride deliberate. Behind her, scattered across different paths and at different distances, members of her network moved with practiced casualness. Thomas Riddick examined a display window 2 shops back. Evelyn Price crossed the street, carrying a basket of laundry. 3 veterans sat on a bench outside the general store, watching everything. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary activity, but Clara felt the invisible threads connecting them all. A network, a web, something stronger than individual action. She reached her home just as a familiar figure emerged from the tree line bordering her property. Elijah Reeves moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder. His clothes were dusty from hard travel, his face drawn with exhaustion. You made good time, Clara said. Didn't stop except to change horses. Elijah climbed her porch steps and pulled a leather document case from inside his coat. I got what you need. More than I expected. Clara led him inside. Thomas and Evelyn arrived moments later through the back door. They gathered around Clara's kitchen table as Elijah opened the case and spread papers across the worn wood surface. Letters, he said, pointing to the first stack. Correspondence between the Lieutenant Governor's Chief of Staff and county sheriffs across 6 districts, all discussing coordinated intimidation efforts, all referencing the same land acquisition strategy. Clara picked up one letter and read. The language was careful, coded, but the meaning was clear. Encourage voluntary sales through community pressure. Address resistance with appropriate measures. Ensure legal complications for families refusing cooperation. They documented everything, Clara said quietly. Rich men always do, Elijah replied. They think they're protected. They think no one will ever see these. Evelyn leaned over another stack. What's this? Business contracts, Elijah said. Between the Latin governor's cousin and a land development corporation based in Atlanta. They're planning to resell seized properties to northern investors at 10 times the seizure price. Clara felt cold anger settle in her chest. This wasn't simple racism. This was calculated greed wearing racism like a convenient mask. Her people were being driven from their land, not because of hatred alone, but because their suffering was profitable. There's one more piece, Elijah said. He pulled a final document from the case. A courier is scheduled to deliver additional contracts to the Development Corporation tomorrow morning. He's traveling through Ashford County tonight. If we intercept him, we get the rest of the evidence, Clara finished. Thomas straightened. Where exactly? Old Post Road, about 2 miles north of the Ashford Junction. He's traveling alone, scheduled to pass through just after sunset. Elijah met Clara's eyes. I can't be part of the interception. If I'm seen, it compromises everything. But we'll handle it, Clara said. The Old Post Road cut through dense forest. Clara positioned herself behind a fallen oak, while Thomas and 2 veterans waited in the brush on the opposite side. Evelyn stood further up the road, visible in the fading light, pretending to adjust her shoe. They didn't have to wait long. The courier appeared on horseback, his satchel secured across his chest. He slowed when he saw Evelyn, natural male suspicion mixing with the superiority of seeing a lone black woman in his path. Evening, he called. Evening, sir, Evelyn replied, her voice soft and deferential. I wonder if you might help me. I'm trying to reach my employer's house, but I think I took a wrong turn. While she spoke, Thomas emerged from the brush behind the courier's horse. He moved silently, his military training evident in every step. He reached up and grabbed the satchel strap just as one of the veterans spooked the horse with a sharp whistle. The animal reared. The courier shouted, reaching for the satchel, but Thomas had already cut the strap with a knife. The courier tumbled backward off his panicked horse. By the time he hit the ground, Thomas was gone, melted back into the forest. The courier scrambled to his feet, cursing. His horse had bolted. The satchel was gone. Evelyn had vanished. Clara watched from behind the oak as the man searched frantically, shouting threats into the darkening woods. Then she withdrew, following the prearranged path back to town. No violence, no gunshots, just precision and timing. By the time she reached home, Thomas had already delivered the satchel. Elijah was examining its contents with barely contained excitement. This is it, he said as Clara entered. Construction contracts, purchase agreements, even correspondence discussing how to handle federal oversight if questions arise. He looked up at her. Clara, this connects everyone. The Latin governor, the county officials, the development corporation, the local law enforcement. It's all here. Clara sat down slowly. She picked up one contract and read through it carefully, her teaching training making her methodical, even in her urgency. Every page confirmed what they'd suspected. Every signature added another link in the chain of conspiracy. We take this to Atlanta, she said finally, to the federal prosecutor's office. Tomorrow, Elijah agreed. I have contacts there. People who'll listen. People who can act. Thomas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You trust these contacts? Yes, Elijah said without hesitation. They're not perfect, but they're honest. And they have the authority to bring indictments. Clara looked at the evidence spread across her table. For weeks she'd been fighting shadows, striking at symptoms while the disease continued spreading. But this was different. This was proof. This was power of a kind she'd never held before. If this works, she said quietly, families can come home. Land can be returned. The conspiracy can be broken. It'll work, Elijah said. His voice carried conviction she hadn't heard before. I promise you, Clara, this time it'll work. Late night settled over Pine Valley. Most of the network had gone home. Only Elijah remained, standing on Clara's porch while she locked her door. Thank you, she said, for the documents, for the risk you took. It's the least I could do. Elijah paused. I know I can't undo what happened before, the betrayal, but I'm trying to make it right. Clara looked at him in the moonlight. She saw genuine remorse in his face, genuine determination. She'd spent so long trusting no one, especially no white person with authority. But Elijah had delivered. He'd risked his career, possibly his life, to get this evidence. Maybe redemption is possible, she said softly. For some people. I hope so. They stood in companionable silence. Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite happiness. She'd forgotten what that felt like. But something close. Something like hope. Tomorrow we go to Atlanta, she said. Tomorrow we end this. Tomorrow. Elijah agreed. Clara watched him walk away into the darkness. Then she turned and looked up at the moon, full and bright. Isaiah used to love full moons, said they made everything seem possible. For the first time since his death, Clara thought he might have been right. She went inside and prepared for bed, her mind already planning the journey to Atlanta. Federal prosecutors, official indictments, justice through legitimate channels, not vengeance, not violence, real, lasting change. She lay down and closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine a future where her fight had succeeded, where families kept their land, where her brother's death meant something beyond grief. For the first time in weeks, Clara Devine felt the possibility of true change. Pre-dawn light filtered through Clara's curtains, barely gray, still holding on to night. She stood at her kitchen table packing supplies into a cloth satchel. Bread, dried meat, a canteen of water. The evidence from yesterday lay organized in stacks beside the leather document case, each paper a promise of justice finally within reach. Chickens stirred in the yard outside. A rooster crowed tentatively, testing the coming morning. Clara heard footsteps on her porch. She opened the door to find Elijah already dressed for travel, his federal badge pinned to his vest. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." He stepped inside, glancing at the packed evidence. "I've been thinking about protocols, federal procedures for handling evidence like this. And? I should transport the documents myself." Elijah spoke carefully, watching her reaction. "Official chain of custody matters in cases this big. If I bring them in personally, with my badge and authority, the prosecutor's office can act immediately. No questions about how we obtained them." Clara felt resistance rise in her chest. "I should come with you." "You should," he agreed, "but not in the same transport. If we're stopped together, a white marshal and a black woman traveling together with explosive evidence against state officials, it raises too many questions, too many risks." Clara studied his face. The logic made sense, even as every instinct told her to maintain control of the evidence herself. "Thomas and I can follow a few hours behind you," Elijah continued. "Separate routes. That way, if anything happens to one group, the other still reaches Atlanta." "Nothing should happen to either group," Clara said quietly. "No, but we plan for contingencies." Elijah picked up the document case. "I'll take the morning train from Ashford. You and Thomas take the afternoon stage. We meet at the Federal Building tomorrow morning." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist on keeping the evidence close, but she recognized the truth in what Elijah said. His federal authority gave the documents legitimacy. Hers never could. "All right," she said finally, "but you take extra precaution. You watch everyone around you." "I will." Elijah secured the case under his arm. "Clara, by tomorrow night, indictments will be filed. The lieutenant governor, the sheriffs, all of them. This ends soon. Clara walked him to the door. Dawn was breaking properly now, pink light spreading across the eastern sky. She watched Elijah descend her porch steps, document case held tight against his body. "Elijah," she called. He turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for trying to make things right." He nodded once, then walked toward town. Clara stood on her porch watching until he disappeared around the bend in the road. Then she went back inside to wait for Thomas. They'd give Elijah a 2-hour head start before beginning their own journey. Thomas arrived just after sunrise. They sat at Clara's table drinking coffee, discussing the route they'd take. The conversation felt ordinary, practical, planning a simple trip. That ordinariness shattered when Evelyn burst through the door without knocking. "Something's happened," she gasped. "In town, behind the general store." Clara was already moving, Thomas right behind her. They ran through the morning streets, past confused neighbors, toward the small crowd gathering in the alley beside Pritchard's general store. Clara pushed through the onlookers and stopped dead. Elijah lay on his back in the dirt. Blood soaked his shirt from a wound in his chest. His eyes were open but glazing over. The document case was gone. Clara dropped to her knees beside him. "Elijah, Elijah, stay with me." His eyes found her face. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet, rattling sound. "Who did this?" Clara pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop bleeding that was already slowing for the worst reason. "Who?" Elijah's lips moved. A single word, barely audible. "Sorry." Then his eyes went empty. Clara stayed kneeling there, her hands covered in his blood, feeling the last fragile thread of hope snap inside her chest. Around her, voices rose in confusion and fear. "Someone get the sheriff. Federal marshal's been killed. Lord, have mercy." Thomas pulled Clara to her feet. "We need to move. Now." But Clara couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the simple, devastating fact that Elijah was dead and the evidence was gone. By midday, rumors spread through Pine Valley like poison. A white marshal murdered in a black neighborhood. A black woman seen fleeing the scene. The sheriff claimed witnesses placed Clara Devine at the location with a gun. Clara knew it was a lie, but she also knew lies were as good as truth when white authorities spoke them. Her network gathered at Thomas's house, voices overlapping in panic. "They're saying you killed him. Sheriff's organizing a search party. We should get you out of the county." Clara sat silent through all of it, her mind working through the pieces that didn't fit. Elijah had been shot in an alley he had no reason to enter. The document case was gone, but his federal badge remained pinned to his vest. No robber would leave something that valuable. And the timing, perfectly calculated to destroy both the evidence and Clara's credibility. "This wasn't random violence," she said, cutting through the anxious chatter. "Someone knew about the evidence. Someone knew Elijah was transporting it." Thomas frowned. "Only people who knew were us." "The network?" "Exactly." Silence fell across the room as the implications settled. Clara looked around at faces she'd trusted, people who'd fought beside her. But someone in this network had betrayed them all. That evening, Clara tracked down the boy who'd found Elijah's body. A sharecropper's son named Moses, barely 12 years old. "You saw someone leaving the alley?" Clara asked gently. Moses nodded. "Didn't see his face, but I saw his shoes, fancy leather ones, black and shiny, and he was humming." "Humming what?" "Church song. Amazing Grace." Clara's blood went cold. She knew only one man in Pine Valley who wore expensive leather shoes and habitually hummed hymns, Reverend Samuel Holt. She found him that night at the church, preparing for evening service. He looked up when she entered, his expression perfectly calibrated surprise. "Sister Clara, I heard about Marshal Reeves. A terrible tragedy. Where are the documents, Samuel?" His face shifted, just slightly, just enough. I don't know what you mean. The evidence. The documents proving the land seizures. Elijah was carrying them when he was killed. Clara stepped closer. You're the only person who knew he'd be behind that store this morning. You're the only person who wears shoes like the ones Moses described. Reverend Holt's expression hardened. You're confused. Grief has made you irrational. How long? Clara's voice stayed level despite the rage building in her chest. How long have you been informing on your own people? I've been protecting them, Holt said sharply. Making accommodations. Ensuring our community survives by cooperating with reality instead of fighting futile battles. You sold us out for land. I accepted compensation for helping maintain order, for preventing worse violence. He straightened his collar. Someone had to think practically. Clara felt something break inside her that couldn't be repaired. You killed Elijah. You destroyed the evidence. And now you've framed me. I've done what was necessary, Holt said. And yes, I've ensured certain testimony will reach the sheriff. Testimony placing you at the scene. With motive. With opportunity. He smiled coldly. You were always too dangerous, Clara. Too radical. The white folks were right to fear you. Clara heard footsteps outside. Voices. The sheriff's men were coming. She ran. Twilight deepened into near darkness as Clara crouched in a thicket 1/2 mile outside town. She could hear dogs baying in the distance, search parties spreading through the woods. Her network had fractured. She didn't know who else Holt had compromised, didn't know who she could trust. Everything she'd built had collapsed in a single day. Clara pressed her back against a tree trunk and closed her eyes. Isaiah was dead. Elijah was dead. The evidence was gone. She was hunted. Alone. The dogs howled closer. Night settled thick over the pine woods. No moon showed through the canopy. Clara sat motionless in the corner of an abandoned smokehouse, its walls still stained black from years of curing meat. The structure leaned badly to one side, half collapsed, hidden so deep in the forest that even hunters rarely stumbled across it. She'd been there for hours, waiting, listening to the search parties grow more distant as darkness made their work impossible. The dogs had lost her trail at the creek. Clara's hands still bore traces of Elijah's blood. She'd tried washing in the stream, but the stains remained, brown crescents under her fingernails, physical proof of how completely everything had fallen apart. A stick snapped outside. Clara tensed, fingers closing around a heavy piece of firewood. She positioned herself behind the door, ready to fight or run depending on who appeared. Clara, Thomas Riddick's voice, barely above a whisper. It's me, alone. She exhaled slowly and pushed the door open enough to see his face. Thomas stood in the darkness carrying a cloth bundle. He looked haggard, worn down by the day's events. How'd you find me? Clara asked. Same way I found enemy positions in France. Patience and good tracking. Thomas slipped inside and closed the door carefully. Brought you food, water, and information you need to hear. Clara took the bundle. Inside was cornbread wrapped in cloth, a jar of water, and an apple. Simple food that felt impossibly precious. Sheriff's convinced half the county you killed Elijah, Thomas said while Clara ate. They're organizing a larger search party for tomorrow morning, bringing in men from 3 counties over. And the network? Thomas's expression darkened, fractured. Some people are scared. They think associating with you will bring trouble down on their families. Evelyn Price stopped answering her door. The Carter family sent word they can't help anymore. Clara swallowed a bite of cornbread that suddenly tasted like ash. Can't blame them. I've become dangerous to know. Not everyone abandoned you, Thomas said firmly. Me, the Riddick cousins, old Moses Jenkins and his sons, Sarah Clement. We're still with you. We know the truth. 6 people against the entire state. David only needed a sling and 1 stone. Thomas pulled papers from his jacket. I spent the afternoon asking questions, careful questions. learning what I could about Reverend Holt. Clara set down her food and took the papers. Even in the dim light filtering through gaps in the walls, she could make out names, dates, property transfers. Holt's been working with the lettee. Governor's office for 8 months, Thomas explained. Started small, telling them which families might sell land cheap if pressured right, which community leaders could be intimidated, which ones needed to be removed. Clara's hands tightened on the papers. He sold out his own congregation. He sold out everyone. But he was smart about it. Never looked like he was involved. Always seemed surprised when bad things happened. Always offered comfort and prayers afterward. Thomas's voice carried deep disgust. Perfect cover. Clara read through the documents slowly, her mind cataloging details. Holt had received 3 separate land deeds as payment. Property that had belonged to black families now registered in his name. He'd also been promised a position in the state legislature once the current land consolidation effort succeeded. He believed he'd be rewarded, Clara said quietly. Thought he could climb by stepping on his own people. He thought cooperation would save him. Thomas shook his head. Didn't understand that, to those white politicians, he's just a useful tool. They'll discard him the moment he stops being helpful. Clara studied the property deeds more closely. All 3 transfers had been notarized by the same county clerk. All 3 included suspiciously identical language about voluntary sales. The patterns were obvious once you knew to look. "This is sloppy work," she murmured. They didn't expect anyone to examine it closely. Why would they? Who was going to challenge state officials and a respected reverend? Thomas leaned against the wall. But Clara, even with these papers, we can't prove Holt killed Elijah. Can't prove he stole the evidence. Don't need to prove the murder, Clara said. Her mind was working faster now, pieces clicking into place. Just need to prove he's corrupt. Once his credibility falls apart, everything else he said becomes questionable, including testimony placing me at that alley. She spread the papers across the smokehouse floor and began arranging them in order. Dates here, property transfers there, payments received, meetings documented. Elijah said the federal prosecutor could act on evidence of corruption, Clara said, thinking aloud. These deeds show Holt profiting directly from displaced black families. The timing matches major attacks. The county clerk's involvement proves coordination with local government. Thomas crouched beside her. But how do we get this to a federal prosecutor when you're wanted for murder, and every official in 3 counties is hunting you? Clara was silent for several minutes, studying the documents, thinking through options. Finally, she looked up. We don't deliver it ourselves. We make it public. Release it so broadly that prosecutors have to respond. She pointed to specific papers. This deed transfer happened 3 days after the Wilson family's farm burned. This one? Right after the Henderson lynching. The pattern is undeniable. Public how? Black newspapers, church networks, white journalists sympathetic to federal oversight of Southern corruption. Clara's voice gained strength. We send copies everywhere at once. Create enough noise that even if local authorities ignore it, someone with actual power has to investigate. Thomas nodded slowly. That could work. But we'd need to make copies, need access to a printing press or typewriter, need people willing to distribute them. Sarah Clement works at the White Methodist Church, Clara said. They have a mimeograph machine, and Moses Jenkins's oldest son drives a delivery route that covers 4 counties. We're talking about exposing a sitting reverend and state officials. Yes, they'll come after everyone involved. They already are, Clara said flatly. Right now, we're running scared, hiding, fractured. This turns it around, puts them on defense, makes them answer questions instead of asking them. She gathered the papers carefully, organizing them into a sequence that told the clearest story. Land theft, coordinated violence, corruption from county clerk through reverend up to the Latin governor's office. "There's something else," Thomas said quietly. "I heard Holt talking at the church this evening. He's planning a special service tomorrow. Big gathering. Says he wants to pray for Sister Clara's troubled soul and help the community heal from her violent influence." Clara's jaw tightened. "Performing righteousness while the blood's still fresh. He's convincing people you've lost your mind. That grief made you dangerous. That killing Elijah proves you've become what white people always feared." Thomas's expression was grim. "By tomorrow evening, half the black community will believe his version of events." Clara stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. Her exhaustion had transformed into something sharper, clearer. "Then we have until tomorrow evening to make sure the truth reaches people first," she said. "How long would it take to copy these documents? With Sarah's help on the mimeograph? Maybe 3 hours for enough copies to distribute wide. And delivery? Moses's son makes his rounds starting at dawn. Could have copies in circulation across 4 counties by midday tomorrow." Clara moved to the smokehouse door and looked out at the darkness. Somewhere out there, search parties were camping for the night, waiting for dawn to resume hunting her. Sheriff Briggs was probably coordinating with officials from neighboring counties. Reverend Holt was likely sleeping peacefully, confident his betrayal would succeed. She thought about Isaiah, about Elijah, about every family driven from their land by the conspiracy these documents exposed. "We start before dawn," Clara said. "Get to Sarah's church. Make copies. Have them distributed before Holt's special service." She turned back to Thomas. "Can you get word to the others? The ones still loyal?" "I can. Tell them this ends tomorrow, one way or another." Thomas clasped her shoulder briefly. "I'll have Sarah ready. You rest now. You'll need strength for what comes next." After Thomas left, Clara allowed herself to eat the rest of the food he'd brought. She drank the water slowly, rationing it. Then she lay down on the smokehouse floor, using her bundled shawl as a pillow. Sleep came in fragments. She'd doze for minutes, then wake to sounds that might be nothing, or might be danger. Each time she woke, she thought through the plan again, looking for weaknesses, finding solutions. By the time dawn approached, she'd refined every detail. Clara stood and stretched her stiff muscles. Through gaps in the wall, she could see the sky lightening from black to deep blue. Birds were beginning their morning calls. She stepped out of the smokehouse into the cold dawn air. Mist hung between the pine trees. The search parties would be stirring soon, preparing to resume their hunt. But Clara was done hiding. She started walking toward town, moving carefully through the forest, every sense alert. The documents were safe in her jacket pocket. The plan was clear in her mind. Reverend Holt had tried to destroy her, had murdered a good man and stolen evidence that could have brought down the entire conspiracy. Now Clara would use his own greed against him, would turn his betrayal into the weapon that finally exposed the truth. Clara moved through the misty morning forest wearing a kitchen maid's uniform and headscarf Evelyn had smuggled to her overnight. The disguise transformed her into someone invisible, just another black woman traveling to work in a white household. She kept her head down and her movements purposeful as she entered Pine Valley through the narrow service roads that wound behind the larger properties. The town was waking up slowly. Smoke rose from chimneys. A few early workers moved along the main street. Clara avoided the open areas, sticking to alleys and back paths she'd known since childhood. Her first stop was the small frame house where Sarah Clement lived with her elderly mother. Clara tapped softly on the back door. Sarah answered immediately, eyes wide with recognition despite the disguise. "Thomas said you'd come," Sarah whispered, ushering Clara inside. "Everything's ready." The kitchen table was covered with freshly mimeographed copies of the documents Thomas had provided. Sarah had worked through the night, the purple ink still sharp on white paper. Each copy showed Reverend Holt's signature on land deeds. Each one documented payments he'd received. Each one connected him directly to displaced black families. "Beautiful work," Clara said quietly. "I made 200 copies," Sarah replied. "Moses's boy is waiting out back with his delivery wagon. He'll distribute them starting in the next county and work his way back here by afternoon." Clara picked up one of the copies and read through it carefully. The evidence was damning, clear, impossible to explain away. "There's extra copies for local distribution," Sarah continued. "I thought maybe drop them at church doorsteps, slip them under doors. Make sure every black household gets one before Holt's special service tonight." "Perfect." Clara set down the paper. "I need you to do one more thing. Name it. There's a white journalist named William Cross, works for the Atlanta Constitution. He's written pieces opposing Klan violence and questioning state officials who tolerate it." Sarah nodded. "I know his work. Send him a full packet by telegraph. Include a letter explaining that these documents prove state-level coordination of land theft targeting black families. Make it clear this involves sitting officials." Clara paused. "Cross will publish it if he believes it's legitimate. And nothing makes evidence more legitimate than officials trying to suppress it." "I'll send it within the hour," Sarah promised. Clara helped bundle the documents for distribution, working quickly and methodically. Moses's son, a quiet young man named Daniel, loaded the packages into his wagon beneath sacks of grain and flour. He'd deliver them like regular goods, except these packages would explode Reverend Holt's carefully constructed reputation. By the time Clara left Sarah's house, the sun had fully risen. She moved through the town more carefully now, staying in shadows, avoiding direct sight lines. The disguise helped, but she couldn't risk someone looking too closely. She made her way to the church where Holt kept his office. The building was empty this time of morning. Holt conducted his pastoral visits in the afternoons, and the janitor didn't arrive until evening to prepare for services. Clara had watched Holt's routines for years while teaching. She knew he kept a spare key hidden beneath a loose brick near the back entrance. She found it exactly where it had always been. Inside, the church smelled of old wood and candle wax. Clara's footsteps were silent on the worn floorboards as she moved toward Holt's private office. The door was locked, but the lock was simple. She used a thin piece of metal from her pocket, a skill Thomas had taught her during their planning sessions, and felt the mechanism give way. The office was neat, almost obsessively organized. Books arranged by height, papers stacked in perfect piles, a large Bible open on the desk. Clara began searching methodically. She checked drawers, looked behind furniture, examined every potential hiding place. Holt was clever, but clever men often fell into patterns. She found the satchel in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, beneath stacks of old sermon notes. Elijah's leather bag, still containing the original documents he'd died trying to protect. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Everything was there. Letters from the Lieutenant Governor's office outlining the land consolidation scheme. Coordination documents showing how local sheriffs received orders to intimidate specific families. Payment records proving the whole operation was funded through state channels. This was the evidence that could bring down the entire conspiracy. Clara added her own copies of Holt's corruption documents to the satchel, creating a complete picture. Then she wrapped everything carefully in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. She left the church as quietly as she'd entered, locking doors behind her, replacing the key beneath its brick. No sign she'd ever been there. Her next stop was the post office, where she'd arranged for Evelyn to meet her. Evelyn arrived carrying a basket of laundry, perfect cover for a domestic worker running errands. "Did you get it?" Evelyn whispered. Clara nodded and handed her carefully wrapped packages addressed to 3 different black newspapers and 2 federal prosecutor offices. "Send these from different locations if you can. Make them hard to trace." Evelyn tucked the packages beneath the laundry. "Consider it done." By noon, the documents were circulating. Clara heard whispers as she moved through the black section of town. Still disguised, still careful. People huddled in doorways reading the mimeographed sheets. Voices rose in anger and disbelief. Reverend Holt sold the Wilson farm? He knew about the Henderson lynching beforehand? He's been working with them this whole time? The betrayal cut deep. Holt had presided over funerals, had comforted grieving families, had preached about faith and perseverance, while secretly profiting from their suffering. By early afternoon, Clara watched from a concealed spot across from the church as congregants began arriving, not for the evening service, but now, demanding answers. Holt emerged from the church looking confused, then alarmed as he saw the crowd. Someone thrust a mimeographed document at him. His face went pale as he read it. "These are lies," he said loudly. "Fabrications meant to divide us. That's your signature," an old woman said, her voice shaking. "That's your handwriting on those land deeds. I can explain. You took money while our families were driven out," a man interrupted, "while our children went hungry, while our people were murdered." The crowd pressed closer. Holt backed toward the church door, his composure cracking. He'd relied on respect and authority for so long that he had no defense against direct confrontation. That's when the federal marshals arrived. 3 of them, in official uniforms, moving through the crowd with calm authority. "Reverend Samuel Holt?" the lead marshal asked. "I am," Holt said, straightening slightly. "But there's been a terrible misunderstanding. You're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud, corruption, and obstruction of federal investigation." The marshal produced handcuffs. "Evidence has been delivered to the federal prosecutor's office indicating your involvement in organized land theft and coordination with state officials to deprive citizens of their property rights." Holt's face went from pale to gray. "This is persecution. I am a man of God. You're a man who accepted bribes and betrayed his congregation." The marshal said flatly, "You have the right to remain silent." They handcuffed him there in front of the church, in front of the people he'd claimed to serve. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the marshals led him toward their vehicle. Clara stood across the street, still disguised, still invisible in her maid's uniform. She watched Holt stumble slightly as they guided him into the back of the marshal's automobile, watched him look back at the church one last time, perhaps realizing everything he'd built was gone. She didn't smile, didn't feel triumph, just a deep, settling sense of things beginning to balance. The truth was out now, spreading like fire through dry grass, impossible to contain. The conspiracy was collapsing. Clara turned away from the scene and walked quietly down the alley, heading toward the next phase. The documents were circulating. The arrests had begun, but the work wasn't finished yet. She stood taller now, breathed easier. The weight that had pressed on her chest since finding Isaiah's body had shifted. Not gone, but no longer crushing. Justice was slow, imperfect, but it was moving. The evening air felt different now, cleaner somehow, though Clara knew that was just her mind playing tricks. She walked slowly through Pine Valley's main road, still wearing the plain maid's uniform that had served as her disguise all day. The sun hung low, painting everything orange and gold. She turned toward the road leading to where her schoolhouse once stood. The walk took 20 minutes, long enough to hear fragments of conversation from porches and doorways. People spoke in hushed tones about the arrests, the documents, the revelations. Some voices carried anger, others confusion. A few held something that sounded almost like hope. Clara passed the general store where Elijah had died. She paused there briefly, remembering his face in the moonlight on her porch, the way he'd genuinely believed the law could work. Maybe he'd been right in the end, just not the way he'd imagined. The schoolhouse remains came into view as she crested the small hill. Charred beams jutted from blackened foundation stones. The smell of old smoke still lingered, mixing with the scent of wild grass that had already started growing through the ashes. Clara stood at the edge of the ruins, studying what remained. She'd poured years of her life into this building, scraped together donations, convinced skeptical families that education mattered, taught children their letters while secretly teaching their parents how to read legal documents that white officials hoped they'd never understand. All gone in one night of hatred and fire. She heard footsteps behind her, multiple sets, moving carefully. Clara turned to find Thomas Riddick approaching with several other community members. Evelyn Price walked beside him. So did old Mr. Henderson, whose son had been killed 2 years back. Mrs. Wilson, who'd nearly lost her farm, the Carter family's patriarch. "Thought we might find you here," Thomas said quietly. "Just wanted to see it one more time," Clara replied. "Federal marshals came through about an hour ago," Mr. Henderson said. "3 of them. They're setting up an office in the old courthouse. Said they'll be overseeing local law enforcement for the foreseeable future." Evelyn nodded. "Sheriff Briggs resigned this afternoon. Walked out of his office and didn't come back. His deputy, too." Clara absorbed this information without reaction. She'd expected as much, once the federal authorities got involved. "There's more," Mrs. Wilson added. "The land office received orders to halt all pending seizures. Federal judge issued an injunction. Every family that lost property in the last 2 years can file for restoration. The Cobbs already filed." "Mr. Feek, Carter said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Got their paperwork in before sunset. My family's filing tomorrow." Clara felt something ease in her chest. The families would get their land back. Not all the damage could be undone, but this was something real, something that mattered. "We came to talk to you about the school," Thomas said carefully. "There's no school," Clara replied, gesturing at the ruins. "Not yet," Evelyn said. "But there will be. We've been talking all afternoon. Families are ready to contribute. Materials, labor, money, whatever it takes." Mr. Henderson stepped forward. "We want you to plan it, Clara. Tell us what you need, how big it should be, where to build it." Clara shook her head slowly. "I can't be the face of this. You all know that. Federal marshals or not, there are still people in this county who want me dead or locked up." "Then don't be the face," Mrs. Wilson said firmly, "but be the mind behind it, the heart of it. Work with us to make it happen." They talked there among the ruins as the sun continued its descent. Clara explained what a proper school needed. Space for at least 30 students, windows for light, a wood stove that actually worked, bookshelves, desks that didn't wobble, a separate room for older students learning advanced subjects. "And the name," Thomas said. "What should we call it?" Clara didn't hesitate. "The Isaiah Divine Learning House." The group fell silent for a moment. "Your brother would have liked that," Evelyn said softly. "He believed in this work more than I did sometimes," Clara replied. "He protected this school because he understood what it meant. What it could become." She paused. "If we're rebuilding, we do it in his name, so everyone remembers what we're fighting for." They agreed without debate. Over the next 3 months, Pine Valley slowly rebuilt. Clara worked quietly, avoiding attention, while federal cases progressed. Indictments rolled through the county like thunder. The lieutenant governor resigned under pressure. 6 sheriffs faced charges. Land deeds were reviewed and corrected. Families returned to properties they had been forced to abandon. The Klan activity that had terrorized the region for years simply collapsed. Without political protection, and with federal oversight watching every move, the violence that had seemed unstoppable just stopped. Some men fled the county. Others kept their heads down and hoped to be forgotten. Clara never sought recognition. When journalists tried to interview her, she refused. When people called her brave, she walked away. She attended planning meetings for the new school, but always sat in the back, letting others lead the discussions. Construction began in January. By March, walls stood. By April, the roof was complete. The building rose larger and sturdier than the original, built by hands that understood what they were protecting. The Isaiah Divine Learning House opened on a warm spring morning. Clara stood outside during the ceremony, watching families arrive, watching children she'd once taught climb the front steps, watching hope take physical form. Inside, young voices rose in reading lessons. The sound carried through the open windows, sweet and strong. Clara turned away from the building and began walking home. Her cane? She needed one now, after all those nights in the cold woods during her months of hiding, tapped a steady rhythm against the packed earth road. The sun settled lower, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. From inside the school, she heard children humming between their lessons, a familiar tune. One Isaiah used to sing while walking home from work, his voice carrying across the fields. Clara stopped walking, closed her eyes, let the sound wash over her. "I was never ruthless by nature," she whispered to the empty road, to her brother's memory, to whoever might be listening. "Only by necessity." She opened her eyes and continued walking, the song following her home through the gathering dusk. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.